I'll put it in a second. It just takes a minute to go live. I'll put it in a second.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Okay, the live stream link is in the Zoom chat now.
All righty. If when it hits 12:02, I think it'll be time for us to kick this off. So. I should be showing puppy pictures right now, Daniel. Daniel and I are kind of a part of this puppy, I guess, team. Anyway, it's 12:02, so why don't we get started? So, hi everyone. I'm Jeff Tenenbaum. Daniel Yim and I lead the Hyperledger Washington DC meetup group. I wanted to say thank you for joining our quarterly Hyperledger meetup session. And today we are really excited to have with us Heather Dahl, who is the CEO of Indico.tech, and Dr. Chase Cunningham, who is the Chief Strategy Officer for Ericom Software. As many of you know, zero trust is a topic where we're seeing an increasing level of interest and activity. Organizations are looking at strategies where they move from a network perimeter-based cybersecurity approach to a different type of strategy where there is no implicit trust when accessing resources. They're also looking at how we solve one of the biggest challenges on the internet today, which is identity. Some of you may already be familiar with Hyperledger Indy project or with Sovereign. So in today's session, we'll get to learn about both worlds and how they fit together. The future of privacy and security, decentralized identity, and zero trust. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Heather and Chase.
Thank you. I will kick it off on behalf of Chase and myself. Chase, are you here?
I'm here. You see me?
Great. Yep, I can see you. There you are. It's really an honor to be here with you today. Chase and I have been working on this space for just over 10 years, and so we're thrilled that we finally get to be a part of the Hyperledger DC meetup. We are both based in the DC area ourselves. So just I'm going to be the professional clicker here on our slide deck for Chase and myself, but just to level set about what we're going to talk today is our theme is never trust, always verify. And Chase and I actually first started our work in the respective areas of the trust and the verify when we worked together at Newstar developing threat intelligence solutions. That was back when, like eons ago, I feel, Chase. And this is where our paths and lives have taken us, but we have always worked together over the past decade on how can we make the internet better and more secure for everyone. So just to level set, zero trust is rooted in the belief that nothing should be trusted, whether it resides inside the network or outside the perimeter, always verify. Decentralized identity, sometimes known as self-sovereign identity, is a consent-based mechanism for using a blockchain-enabled verifiable credentials to prove things about who you are without anyone else managing, storing, or selling your data. So it's privacy and proof of verification. What Chase and I are going to do today is we're going to kick it off with Chase. We're going to explore how decentralized identity fits into the application of zero trust. Chase and I both here, when I talk about decentralized identity, I get questions about zero trust and vice versa. So we thought coming together to do this meetup would actually help bring both models together under one umbrella and one discussion and move this topic forward. So what I'll do is set it up here for Chase and let me know when to move to the next slide.
Okay, cool. Yeah, Heather, you just made me feel really old, so thanks. We've been at this
We started working on this when we were in kindergarten, Chase.
Yeah, this is
Yeah.
thanks. So yeah, what I'm going to cover, and I'll be moving quick here because we've only got an hour, but I think we got some really good content. So I'm going to talk about why we continue to fail in the space around cyber. I'm going to point out again, and this is not news to anybody, the perimeter is dead. Like it died. COVID did a lot of bad stuff. The only good thing COVID did was it effectively eliminated the concept of a secure perimeter. So we are all way outside of that. I'm going to give you some concepts on arguments against change, like why people fight this. Talk real quick about why zero trust is what it is, why the cloud is so important. And lastly, I'll leave you with one of my favorite references, which is The Mandalorian, right? So this is the way. So follow with me here and we'll be moving relatively quickly. Go back one. Yep. So everyone in the space, in cybersecurity space, always asks about the next attack. The next attack. What's the next thing? What's post-quantum? What's going on in space-based and future state malware and whatever? In reality, it's the same thing. Like, yes, there are different delivery mechanisms that you use to get stuff into an infrastructure and cause compromise, like SolarWinds, which SolarWinds honestly was not that different. It was basically a further iteration of what already happened with Maersk and Norsk Hydro of using software in the supply chain to cause an exploit. But once they got in, it's the same thing that's happened 1,000 times over. Like you get in, set up your infrastructure, move laterally, create backdoors, use accounts, privileges, go forward, cause bad, things and problems. It's the same thing. If you think about it like that, we're not really dealing with anything that's that crazy different. Next slide. I always like to refer everybody to The Office. That's one of my favorite shows, right? SolarWinds in the picture on the other side. If corporate asks you what's the difference between SolarWinds and Fear the Hack, it's not. It's kind of the same thing. Like it's basically the same stuff, just slightly packaged different. If that's the case, if it's always sort of the same thing, then that means the fundamental physics of the problem are being ignored. And how do we start to understand that and address with it? Next slide. Bad guys continue to say they're coming back. Like this is from the guys that were in and used SolarWinds to cause compromises and said flat out, we're coming back. And how do they say they're coming back? Why is this a first batch for them? It's because they're preserving access. And they're telling you flat out on the underground, this is something that we found doing some recon, them saying we're coming back because we have more access. How do they have more access? What do they use for those additional accesses? Usernames, privileges, and accounts. Again, not crazy different after they get in. This is the same stuff over and over, rinse and repeat throughout cyber history. If this continues to be the problem, then that means we're ignoring the reality of the space in which we operate. Next slide. Andy Ellis, who's one of the best CISOs in the business, asked the question I think everybody should really wrap their head around. And when we think about what's going on in the space and the future state of where we're going, like Heather's talking about the future of this, is it really worried about what's going on right now? Or should we be worried about what's coming in the future? And if it's what's coming in the future, shouldn't we be asking this question of what else is going to be continually showing up in the news because we're ignoring the same things over and over and calling it something new? Like this is a really good question. We should be asking, what are the fundamental requirements that allow this to continue to propagate? Next slide. It's a really good question. You can talk about the cyber kill chain. This is what most people focus on in cyberspace. And they say, the bad guy always wins. All the bad guy needs is one thing to continue to cause compromise, etc. Wrong. The bad guy, just like the good guys, needs continued access to continue to cause compromises like I showed you in that slide prior. That's a reality. Like that's a fundamental flaw in their operating model. If you look at the kill chain, which is what everyone references here to kind of ground ourselves in the space, it's these things: recon, weaponize, delivery, exploit, install, command and control, exfiltration. The reality is we're only in control of a portion of that and the bad guys own the rest. If you click, you'll see where we have an opportunity to disrupt what they're doing. We can't do anything about recon. They look outside of our windows and walk down our street all day long. That's how you do recon. We can't stop it. The internet allows recon. We can't stop weaponization. They will find stuff to use to cause a compromise, a la SolarWinds and a la 100 other things. We can't stop that. We can stop these other things. And if you notice, we're basically saying the bad guys, you got 2. We'll give you 2 out of these 7. We own the other 5. We can stop delivery. We can stop exploitation. We can stop installation. We can stop command and control. We can stop exfil. We have the opportunity to disrupt the capability set that the adversary uses to continually access and cause compromises. It requires them to have continual access, which is based on what? Users, identity, access, passwords, those types of things. Next slide. They have to have access for success. The perimeter-based model categorically has failed. If you build me a 50-foot wall, I will build a 51-foot ladder. Like, it's literally that simple. And this has proven itself time and time again throughout history. If you continue to engage in leveraging perimeter as your control plane, you are enabling failure. And this is not new. Next slide. We've known about this for about 1,000 years. Anybody remember the story of Troy, right? Remember, we used to call malware Trojans. Why did we do that? Because way back in, I think it was 1260 BC was the first time somebody ever slid a piece of infrastructure, a piece of malicious code past the wall, burn things to the ground. I mean, that's exactly what happened. We've known about this for a long, long time. It's not that we don't understand the problem. It's that we aren't addressing the fundamental issues, the requirements that will allow us to change the game better for ourselves. Next slide. It's all, I mean, in reality, it's about making security better for the users, better for how we operate in space. What we don't want and what causes problems with security technology is we continue to throw them into the mix and say, you have to do these other things. You've got to set up a VPN. You've got to have passwords. Well, you have to reset your password every 90 days. Oh, on top of that, you got to do MFA. Oh, on top of that, you need to make sure your firewall is configured correctly. Oh, and well, we need to make sure we have endpoint running. Like, it just becomes barbed wire wrapped up around the users. And who wants to operate in that space? None of us do. It's not about having more. It's about having the right stuff in the right place to address the right problems with the right technology that will solve the problem and take the power away from the adversary. Next slide. Secure perimeter is not an arguable defense. Like, you don't have one. Anyone that says they do, this is what they got. They got a high fence. You can look through it because it's chain link, because that's how you do a recon. They can get past it because they'll clip that piece of plastic and walk back in, and they'll leave the lock bolted for you. But secure perimeter, just like we've seen 10,000 times over, is not a referenceable strategy, because what do we use to invalidate a perimeter? Access. If a user can get past something, we've invalidated a perimeter. Like, it's that simple. So that means that we must put the perimeter somewhere else. Another thing that people argue about in this space is they talk about being cyber smart. Like, they're going to make their people better at stopping compromises. You can't do that. 4 to 6% of the workforce historically is going to click a link no matter what you do. You could staple their hands to the desk and people would use their nose to click on a phishing link. Like, that's the reality of the space in which we operate. We can't make people that aren't cyber people cyber smart all the time, every time. Just to give you an example of how crazy it is to try and think we'll make people better, 7% of Americans think chocolate milk comes from brown cows. If you have grown adults that don't understand that chocolate milk is based on sugar and cocoa, not cows that are brown, you think you're going to train them to stop a phishing exploit? Like, that's wrong. We can't do these things and expect the outcome to be any different. Next slide. You can't continually say we've upgraded our current technology. We've weaponized the firewall. We're going to stop the bad guys with this new piece of infrastructure and whatever else. It's probably not going to be that much different. Like, it's going to look like this llama with a PKK machine gun on its back, where, yeah, it's kind of four-wheel drive. Yes, it's kind of weaponized, but in reality, it's just a sort of Frankenstein version of something that might be lethal if used in a very limited sort of engagement. Upgrading legacy technology, new stuff, if it's not applied correctly to the realities of the problem, is just as asinine as a llama with a machine gun on its back. Kind of cool, probably sort of dangerous, but not necessarily correct. Our organizations also say that they don't have enough people. They don't have enough people. We need more people. We need more people. We have a lack of human capital. That's wrong. We have enough people if we use the right tools to solve the right problems in the right ways. Just like this person says, I need more stuff. I need more. They're using the wrong things. You see that they've used everything that they could to take that lug nut off except for an impact wrench. I mean, if you continue to use the wrong tools to solve the wrong problems, yes, you need more people. If you use the right tools, an impact wrench, one person can remove all 6 of those lug nuts and you can go on about your day. The cloud does not make you inherently more secure. We can't move stuff to the cloud and think we're doing anything any better. It's just the cloud is someone else's infrastructure, and Jeff Bezos is glad to take your money because you're putting stuff in the cloud. This is from AWS's Terms of Service 16 to show you they don't care whether or not you're secure in their cloud. It says their security requirement for them is of the cloud, right? Compute, network, storage. You are responsible for stuff in the cloud, and they don't care if it is or isn't secure. So moving stuff to the cloud fundamentally, categorically, strategically does not make things any better. It's just you saying because it's in the cloud. Not a good way to approach the problem. Next slide. Cyber insurance is not going to make anyone in this space any better, any safer, any faster, any more realistically defended than it was in the past. You ever wrecked your car and had to deal with an insurance company? Imagine if you wrecked your infrastructure and had to deal with an insurance company paying out that premium. Anyone that says that they're better off in the space because of the fundamental issues that they used to drive a decision around cyber insurance is wrong. They should be sitting like Ralph Wiggum on the back of the bus and going, I'm in danger, because all it is basically saying I've paid for something that might help me get a response after I've been breached. Wouldn't you rather deal with the problem before it becomes a problem? Next slide. And we all know this, like this is not news to us. The problems that we face, like I talked about back with SolarWinds and everything else, we've seen 10,000 times before. We've been warned, and it's literally this clear. If you hit this sign, you're gonna hit that bridge, and you have a choice. You can either smash the gas and hope you bash through that bridge and get to the other side, and maybe your vehicle is in some sort of state where it can continue to drive forward, or you can say, wait, there's a different way to do this. I need to approach the problem differently. I need to apply strategy and technology in a manner that addresses the realities of the space and make a hard right turn and go around it and actually fix the problem. We are all so far outside of the perimeter now that we can't continue to engage in thinking that the old space is going to work any better. It's not. You can't live inside of the horde down there and think you're not going to get bit by a zombie. It's not going to get better. 2021 is not that different from 2020. Everything still sucks. I mean, we're still here on Zoom. We're not in a room having a conversation. People are not going back to the office. Everybody likes remote work. BYOD continues to get bigger, badder, faster. What does that mean? That means if we don't address the problems correctly, we will have more problems. We have to look at the physics, the fundamental, the underlying issues. Next slide. That's why there's a movement around zero trust going on. That's why you hear it so often. It's because it is a big thing that's taking place because people see the value in it and they understand the strategy that can help them enable outcomes, right? 78% of organizations globally are moving towards zero trust for security infrastructure. 9% of the DoD, 13% of financial, 14% of healthcare. The total addressable market for ZT as it stands right now today is about $40 billion. That means that there is a valid, verifiable market that's in this space. The tagline, which Heather talked about earlier, is never trust, always verify. Pretty simple. The definition, strategically focused on addressing lateral threat movement within the network by leveraging microsegmentation, granting enforcement based on user context, data access controls, location, application, device posture. What does that really mean? That means you apply very vectored, very controlled access controls to individuals, to entities within space, and you validate and verify that they are who they say they are before you allow a connection to occur. Never trusting, always verifying. This is not new. This has been around for about 12, 13 years. The first reference you can find to this is all the way back in 2004 with a group called the Jericho Forum. 2010, John Kindervag, an analyst at Forrester before me, talked about what it looked like and how zero trust was strategically focused, et cetera. Fast forward, go from there, you can see we went from network, firewall, NAC, to now identity, to users, to accesses. This continues to get more focused around the mechanism with which infrastructure now revolves, which is us, the users. Next slide. There are three very basic principles here, and this fits very well with digital identities, blockchain, immutable records. Verify explicitly, know who you are, always using least privilege access, and assuming everything is compromised. Until you prove otherwise, you're not coming to my house, right? I like to call this the dating my daughter slide. I don't know you, therefore you will not get near my daughter, period, point blank, in a story, until later on when I can verify that this is okay. Next slide. This is not complicated if it's done correctly. This is how simple it can be. This is the way the internet works. This is the way business works today. People need access to resources. I use O365 for email. Okay, cool. How do I do that? I use a device. What does that device use to get me to that resource? A network. What does that network use to allow that connection to occur? A policy engine, some sort of brain that sits there and said, this makes sense in the context of that to allow this to occur. And it does it at speed and scale with intelligence and automation across the entirety of infrastructure. with intelligence and automation. And the only way that you can do that is with this type of approach. Beyond Corp is the thing that people reference all the time. Beyond Corp is just Google's iteration of zero trust. And if you look at what's there, what's the first thing you see? Identity, context, then a rules engine, then enforcement. The first thing is the user, knowing who's doing what, where, having the ability to control that access, that particular protocol that allows that to occur, and making it part of the workflow because it's built around the identity. That's what we have to focus on. That's where compromises occur. Find me one instance of a machine that's ever been hacked where no human touched it. Doesn't happen. Next slide. It's about access. It's about users, people on devices using networks to get to resources. You have a policy control capability in there. Don't call it zero trust. That's fine. Do call it something else. But the reality of it is this life cycle, this chain is how this occurs. And if you can control those things, back to that earlier slide I showed you, you have 5 different chances to disrupt exploitation operations based on the implementation of this particular approach. It's literally that simple. You can break it down and go even further into it, right? So if you said, what's the run through? That's how it looks. An FTE, me, on my domain joined device, at home on my ISP network, going to email an O365. Nothing is weird. I'm logged in from where I normally log in this time of day. The one thing that I do to have an out of band authentication is I do MFA. Like that's a zero trust implementation. You could add other things into that about the people, the users, the control space and whatever, and continue to make it bigger, better, faster. But ultimately, this is what that life cycle looks like. And lastly, I'll leave you, like I said, with my Mandalorian slide, because this is my favorite part of it is, this is the way. We've tried everything else. We've failed everywhere else. We've realized that the reality of the problem mandates a different approach. The different approach is a combination of strategy and vector technology aligned to solve the realities of the problem for the space in which we operate. Like I said with that slide earlier with the sign, we have 2 choices. You can either continue to go really, really fast and really hard, and you're going to hit the bridge and bad things will probably happen, or you can take a strategic pause, look at how we really deal with the problems and make a hard right turn. Regardless, you can look at all the failure in the past. That's what it is. The only way to do things different is to change our approach going forward. And zero trust combined with these types of solutions that Heather's talking about is the way. And I can tell you flat out from the strategy side of what we're doing at Ericom, we will be plugging into and we will be using these types of things for validated, verifiable credentials because we know that it makes a heck of a difference there. And I run a node. Like, I think that this is important, important enough that I've helped put up my own time, my own effort, my own money to run nodes to help this thing go forward. So last thing, just remember, if you ever question, this is the way.
Heather, I think you might be on mute.
Thank you for catching that. You know, as Chase points to identity, it comes down to how do you trust, how do you verify? The verification is important here, but how do you do that in a way that protects the privacy of the individual? We all know this New Yorker cartoon. It is the most popular cartoon that the New Yorker has run. And how do you identify yourself in the digital world? Well, I think a good place to look back to answer that question is, how do you verify yourself in the physical world, and why do we think that valid verification of ourselves offline is stronger than it is online? And that's because we carry around things like driver's licenses, passports, certificates, notarized documents. We carry them in our wallets, our purses, we keep them in our safety deposit boxes, and we present them at very high value transactions like buying a home, going to the post office to get your first passport. But the fact is, this isn't what happens online. So how do you trust but verify? How do you really know when someone's not a cat, even though they say they're not a cat? And that's what we're going to talk about, is how do you do verification in a trusted way? Here's what the digital world is without built-in identity. what's happening right now. The majority of places, digital identities are controlled by large enterprises and social media platforms. With that comes an abundance of privacy issues. We get our trustworthy data from third parties, but how can you trust and verify that third party? Ultimately, it puts us into this world of complicated integrations. I think COVID is an example of trying to share data between one industry to another that normally doesn't communicate with each other. How do you provide trust in these interactions? Not only the human trust, the trust of legal agreements, but also the technical trust that is built in. We call it machine learning governance. As Chase talked about, logins and passwords, enough said there. It's just not an effective, or we wouldn't be having this conversation. But then how can you do this in a way that can scale and it prohibits forgery? So let's take just a tour down the legacy system. We all know about the centralized database approach where everyone goes into one single domain, and that one digital authority decides to be the issuer of your identity. And then what you happens is we have here, you're everywhere. How many times have you entered the same information? And I want to say this is not simply a fill out form, right? That's not what I'm talking about here. Verifiable credentials isn't an autofill tool, because if it were just an autofill tool, you would still have this and you would still have copies of yourself everywhere. What decentralized identity is you, very much like you do today, is you hold the proof of identity with yourself, like you do with your wallet, and you can choose when to share a credential with a verifier, whether that be a school, an employer, a bank, a shop, so they can ask you for identity to prove yourself, and you get to decide whether you're going to share a credential issued by another entity. And you can also share what portions of that credential you want to disclose to that entity. For instance, in an online world, to buy alcoholic beverages through a wine shop online, I shouldn't have to share how much I weigh. If I were to show my driver's license, it would do that. In this case, we employ zero knowledge proof into verifiable credentials. So why does this work? Let's break this down. Why does this work in our analog offline lines? It's because we have trusted issuers. We've decided we trust the state of Maryland, for instance, to prove our age. The shop, or in this case, if I were going to go to the grocery store to buy a bottle of wine, they trust the state of Maryland, did the KYC, and know exactly how old I am. The state of Maryland Department of Motor Vehicles don't believe they're in the business of helping people buy alcoholic beverages at the grocery store. They're in the business of giving people credentials to drive. However, the trust in that credential is why this system works in our analog lives. So decentralized identity replicates just what I talked about, and it brings together what we call the trust triangle, or you could call it the verification triangle, where you have trust between one entity and another on the issuance of the credential. The credential gets issued directly from the issuer to the holder, which can be a person, a thing, and then that holder decides when and how they are going to share it with the verifier. In this system, there's a governance of data. It's scalable. It's available through the Hyperledger open source repositories. It's developed with privacy by design. It also has built-in compliance by design for those who are implementing it. And it also allows for data sharing without complicated integrations. It allows you to share, for instance, data from the healthcare systems with another system that would never have any reason to integrate with healthcare, for instance, a concert venue. And it can do that with agreements that are put into the actual digital experience. So here's how it's broken down. You have the philosophical trust that we have today. For instance, a shop trusts a credential that's issued by a bank. But that trust just isn't a human-to-human trust. That trust is actually built into the technology with a cryptographic trust. So you have a proof of identity, a proof of data, and then you have a presentation of valid data integrity and also provenance. So what is a verifiable credential exactly? We can hear this term get thrown around a lot. First of all, it's data that's gathered by an entity that has been granted permission by the person that the data is being given to, and they have permission to hold it, own it, verify it. Then the issuer, in this case, packages that data, has gone through their own KYC, they cryptographically sign and link this to the issuer as the original source of the credential. Then that credential is given to the holder, it is accepted by the holder, and is now controlled by the holder in a mobile agent or digital wallet. When that credential is presented to a verifier, a store, your employer, a bank, another entity, that credential can be verified in two ways. If the signature and the keys are in order, the verifier can be assured that the data is valid and has arrived as it was issued based on the know your customer of the issuer. So what you're doing is you're verifying the data source. And you're doing that through, in this case, Hyperledger Indy based networks. So the verifier, why is this private? The verifier can actually contact the issuer and verify the credential based on the network without a direct ping, or what we call phone home, back to the issuer. So I can verify this against the Hyperledger Indy blockchain, but I am not going directly into the issuer's database. In fact, the issuer doesn't even know that the verifier has verified the credential here using the network. This is what it looks like. When you break it all down, how does a system like this come together and how does it apply to Hyperledger? You're using Hyperledger Ursa, which is the cryptography library. Hyperledger Aries, that is the project that's focused on creating the agents and open source code. So in this case, you need cloud agents, mediator agents, which helps talk between the devices and the issuer and laptops. And then you also have Hyperledger Indy. And Indy is the project that creates the networks and the nodes that make the entire system run. So that's how I just broke down where are the different Hyperledger projects and how do they apply it directly to decentralized identity. What we have emerging is a network of networks. We have networks that have come about over the course of the past year and a half for different purposes and reasons. What these networks are all doing is working together so you can have interoperability, where you're going to be able to issue a credential on one network and verify it on another network. So we have at this point 6 different Hyperledger Indy-based networks, and DCO operates a network that is a professionally run network with a mainnet, demonet, and testnet. Sovereign runs also a public permissioned mainnet, buildernet, and demonet. Both of the organizations have international audiences that use those networks. ID Union has come out of Germany. It is also a volunteer community network. We also have Fendi, which is out of Finland. It's a consortium of Finnish organizations that have come together. We have the Canadian Credential Network, which should be coming live here. And then also the Bedrock Business Utility Network, which will be another professionally run network. And that one is also pending going live. But as you can see, these networks are beginning to emerge and they all have their own communities involved. How do you make a network without the agents on top of it? Is pretty useless. What I like to say is when we started this, we created a lot of one-handed handshakes. We had a lot of digital wallets where a credential was issued. Awesome. Now what are you going to do with it? So what we're looking at in the decentralized identity community is creating these full ecosystems where we're issuing credentials that can be consumed, that can be shared, and can be verified, which allows trust but verify. So And in DCO, what we have done is we have open sourced to Hyperledger Aries mediator agent. We announced a working group for open source mobile agent. We announced that today. That's with the Hyperledger Aries working group. And soon we will be open sourcing an enterprise agent also to Hyperledger communities. We offer networks, so anyone can use one of the Indicio networks in order to test out the agents in the ecosystem. You can also go to any of the networks that I showed you earlier to test out your agents. In the case of Indicio, this is a worldwide effort. This is not Washington or just the United States. We have nodes on every continent around. We have nodes, the light gray ones are those that are in the process of being stood up. But what's even more interesting about this is we have enterprises and communities that have come together from all over the world to solve the same problems, especially now that our COVID world has put pressure on our remote work life. So our focus on Indicio and why Indicio and why we spend all our time is we are focused on building. We have done a few years of philosophical conversation in this space, but in Indicio, that's where the rubber hits the road. And we have a communities of doers and builders who are building today, who are putting this together. Many of those involved in our community are starting by keeping it simple. They're creating holder, issuers, and verifiers in their own ecosystem within their own company, or maybe their own small consortium. They're doing a phased agile approach where they're going out and building prototypes to prove that the system works to solve one problem, and then they're quickly moving into production. And so at Indicio, we say, get building today, get building now, because the tools exist. They are open source, and there are communities that can support and help you, whether that's a community like Indicio or any of the other open source decentralized identity communities out there. Our advice is just get going. And so with that, I wrap up my time here talking about decentralized identity. I'm going to turn it over to Chase to wrap it up and talk about how decentralized identity can support the zero trust model.
Yeah, I mean, it's relatively cut and dry to kind of understand what we're getting at there, is that it's basically the principle of never trust, always verify has to be applied collectively. I mean, I saw somebody talking about the maximization of identity of objects, not for individuals, et cetera. Like, what we're trying to do is space where I can verify and validate who you are based on the fact that I won't say trust because I'm the zero trust guy, but that I accept that those are valid things that I can, make sure are realistic and useful. And if we do this, if we implement it correctly, we have an opportunity in the security space specifically to fundamentally change the game. No more worries about breaches from bad passwords, bad usernames, stuff that shouldn't cause compromises. This is the way to actually have an opportunity to remove adversary access, adversary control, and take back some of that initiative. So I've been a big fan of this for a long time. Heather and I have been talking about this for, like she was saying, like 10 years now, which is terrible. But this is where the game starts to change, as this becomes a thing for organizations to adopt.
What we can do is open it up to any questions that we have out here. Let's see here.
We got one that says, who determines who are the issuers?
The issuers, any organization can become an issuer. They would have to develop the issuing agent, do the technology development. Question is more, should I trust the issuer, right? And so that is something where if you're a verifier and you have a certain level of information that you need, or it's a high value transaction, you are probably not going to trust maybe a loyalty card issued by a grocery store because there's lower value trust involved in that credential. In this case, you would want to probably request a credential that was given by a bank or a trusted institution that has a Department of Motor Vehicles, very much like you do right now. I can go in and try to buy a bottle of wine in the grocery store showing a credential or a piece of paper maybe that someone wrote that said, oh yeah, she is over a certain age. You're not going to trust that. But when I pull out my driver's license, you will. Why? Because that human understands who that issuer is. Verifiable credentials and decentralized identity doesn't remove that trust. You're going to determine which issuers you are going to accept credentials from because you agree with the KYC that they go through and you agree with the governance that is involved in the issuance of their credential.
Somebody asked close how verified creds could have stopped SolarWinds. So let me clarify that. Stopping an exploit is pretty much a non-issue. I mean, like I said, weaponization, we can't really stop that. However, what we can stop is the continued access, the lateral movement, the proliferation, the shared resources that cause those. And that's where validated, verified credentials can come into that, because you're able to apply those things just like they're talking about right now with the burn down list that Microsoft and SolarWinds and everybody else is using to remove access, to remove credentials from that infrastructure. So, you know, point being, I can never stop an exploit, like I even said during my slides, right? Recon and weaponization, I can't stop it. And technology by its very nature means if I build it, someone will find a way to break it. However, what I can do is use technology in the space that will allow me to limit and remove those things based on a validated, verified credential.
We have a question about are biometrics considered verifiable credentials? Yes, biometrics can be considered verifiable credentials. There are a number of projects specifically around biometrics and verifiable credentials going on in this space. So I would encourage you to take a look at some of those projects to see there's some really interesting things that they're doing. Also, that's biometrics is being used as a way of offline verification as well. And then there's a question about can the wallet holding the credentials get stolen? Another one that I get is, what if I drop my phone in the pool? What happens? Credentials can be stored in digital wallets that are on the device, or they can also be stored in digital wallets or mobile agents, cloud agents stored in the cloud. So that allows the backup. So if your phone goes into the pool and never recovers, you still have the ability to get your credentials back. There is a white paper specifically on this. That actually is in the Evernym library. That is a very good read on this topic. Looking here, how are issuers going to get paid? And this is something, because this is still emerging technology, we're still exploring all the different ways of monetization. This can be done where issuers get paid by participating in a network group, people buy into the network. They can get paid through tokenization of a network. Issuers may decide that they want to issue credentials because they end up having a cost saving somewhere with other verification. Partnerships can be involved, but this system is going to evolve where issuers do get some type of a remuneration for the effort that they put into the KYC, if that is something that they want to do. Is it possible to decertify an issuer? You would no longer trust that issuer. You would no longer accept the credentials. Someone can have the right to issue credentials, but if they're credentials that your organization does not trust, does not want to accept, then you don't have to accept the verification of it. You go to verify it, it comes from an issuer you don't trust, end of story, you don't accept it. Is there a process, an appeals process? This is through the governance that you would have in what credentials you accept and don't accept. Yes, you would have rules in what credentials you would request. And it is up to you. Just because someone offers you a credential doesn't mean you were forced to accept the credential. And then the last question I think we've come to is, any governments in the world currently using blockchain-enabled digital identity for its citizens? If so, yes. I encourage you to look at the efforts that is going on with BC Gov. Estonia is one. A lot of really forward-thinking, pioneering efforts by BC Gov. That is the area, a lot of projects going on in Canada. Finland, because they're running the Findy network. And we also see some countries that are getting ready to announce digital identity based on verifiable credentials for citizens also in the next probably 3 to 6 months. And a lot of those projects are focused around problems that have been created by COVID. I think we've gotten to the end of the question list. Are we seeing any specific use cases on verifiable credentials? What I'll do is talk about some of the credentials. I'll start off with BC Gov, and BC Gov is doing business registrations using verifiable credentials. But when I talked about the closed ecosystems, what we are doing is we're seeing organizations, for instance, the most obvious one is your COVID health status, where an organization is a laboratory or health provider is issuing a credential that gives your COVID test result. Someone is holding that and traveling to a venue or hospitality, and they're providing that credential as proof of their COVID status so they can enter a nightclub, for instance. We do see those closed ecosystems emerging as we speak. We also see this as far as employee verification. If you have industry where you need to basically contain who is in that bubble, we are seeing verifiable credentials being used for health status, so you don't have individuals going into those bubbles to infect them. Where do I see web apps using decentralized identity? I encourage you to go to organizations like ID Ramp, like Trinsic, like Evernym, like Cabin, or their Liquid Avatar application. Global ID is moved to verifiable credentials. We'll be making that announcement. So there are a number of organizations. All of these organizations have apps and wallets that you can use and download in your daily life right now. I feel like, Chase, I'm getting hit with all the questions here, and you're getting off free here.
I'm getting the easy one. Yeah,
you're getting the easy one.
Yeah, you're answering the important stuff. I mean, ZT's strategy and whatever, but I mean, the way that we're looking at doing that is making that part of things. I can tell you from the product that we're launching in April, we're looking at integrating the digital ID side of the verifiable credential into that whole workflow, so that we have customers that are, they want to jump in and not have to do passwords and resets and all the other crap that we have to deal with. And it's just, you have a validated, verified set of credentials. Do what we need to do. We'll control the infrastructure stuff and go on about your day. Like removing the heft, like I said, with that barbed wire slide of just do your job. Security is handled because of the way that we've built the system to actually do authentication, remove threats, those types of issues.
Well, where we see the handling of core identity versus an attribute credential like a COVID vaccine is we see organizations that are issuing employee identifications. We see organizations issuing financial institution identities, and those are being used to create an attribute credential. The other way that it's being used to create an attribute credential like a COVID vaccine is using existing, like a passport, and doing passport scans to prove who you are with a biometric check against who you are, and then issuing a credential like a COVID vaccine. And are they doing this using single and multiple wallets? This is a multiple wallet world. It's not a one wallet rules them all type of situations. In fact, what we're seeing is organizations have spent a significant amount of time and effort on their mobile applications and their user experience, and they don't want to send their customer over to another wallet and then come back into their application. And so we're seeing the wallets and agents being built into existing applications, but then behind the scenes, they're talking to each other. There are standalone wallets that are being used, and the mobile applications are being developed to talk to those wallets, but they're not sending you between multiple apps or in an app to go to your wallet to come back to your app. That's not the type of user experience that global organizations and enterprises want their customers to have. I think I have run at the end of the questions. I just feel like I finished my finals exam.
Heather, I wanted to thank you so much, Heather, both you and Chase. Thank you so much. And Heather, also I wanted to apologize. I know I mispronounced Indico before, which is embarrassing, but please accept my apologies on that.
No, we don't care how you say it, just as long as you work towards decentralized identity. And that's the most important part. And what I say for this particular meetup, and is for Chase and I, this has been a decade-long journey for both of us. And to be here today talking about something that has matured significantly between zero trust and decentralized identity from where we were 10 years ago when we were looking at, it wasn't even called threat intelligence solutions at the time, but realizing here's the problem with these compromises and breaches that we were working on trying to solve, is it all came down to decentralizing and identity and trust. And so working on these concepts of zero trust, working on decentralized identity, while it may seem like new to some of our audience, this has been something that many people have been working towards for over 10 years now.
Again, it's amazing that it's, we've seen that because we're starting to see, obviously, those applications. I'm seeing them around the education space, again, around the COVID space, like you mentioned before, around Health Pass and things of that nature. So we're very excited to see where it goes. We're certainly seeing a lot of interest in the federal space with organizations like DHS and so on, taking a leadership role there. And certainly I posted a document on NIST around zero trust. So looking forward to seeing where this goes and more use cases and more use of decentralized identity. And we're also excited to hear what we come up with next, what our next topic will be. And if folks have ideas or are interested in any specific topics as part of our Hyperledger meetup, we'd love to get those. And with that, I'd like to say a big thank you again to both Heather and Chase, and also for everyone joining our call today. Daniel, anything?
Yeah, just a quick thing. Yeah, I want to echo Jeff's comments here. I want to thank both Heather and Chase for your time and for taking this opportunity to share your knowledge with their members. And a lot of good questions came up, and a lot of interactive conversation took place today. So thank you very much. We're always looking for interesting topics for presentation for future events. So if any of you have any topics or know of someone who is actively engaged in the space and working on some cool projects, please reach out to either me or Jeff or both of us. I've left our contact information in the chat room, so please reach out to us separately. So that's everything I have. If Jeff, if you don't have anything else, I think we can go and wrap it up.
Yeah, we'll give folks 5 minutes back in their day, and just can't wait for spring. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Hyperledger community. Bye.